Okay. All right, let's get started, guys. I hope you have downloaded chapter number 6, Enterprise Risk Management, Evaluating Corporate and Reputational Risk in order to make strategic marketing decisions. All right. So now, one of the fundamental questions I need to ask you is, what is your exposure to risk? Are you exposed to risk? Have you in your lifetime ever managed risk? Have you taken any risks? Have you quantified risks? And what is your overall attitude towards risks? In about business risks, in general, living life is also a risk, especially now. So from the day you are born, that is also a risk, right? Being born is a huge risk. A lot of people, don't make it as well. There are some deaths also when people are born, right? So that is, being born is also a risk. Then going through your childhood is also a risk. Making the right choice of career, your first job, your career choice also can be a risk. Marriage, one of the biggest risks, right? So you see, when you really look at it, living life is a risk. So is risk taking a bad thing? Actually, it isn't. Some people, even in companies, see this word risk as a dirty word, as a bad word. In fact, all of us take risks. If you are living, that means you are a risk taker and a risk manager without you knowing it. But in our mind, we take risks that we can control. In our mind, there's a natural tendency, and we have learned through our childhood to understand the impact of taking a risk. Even driving on the road is a risk. Taking a flight is a risk. Sometimes if you are in the classroom right now, that is also a risk because you are inside a building. The projector can fall on your head. A wall can collapse. So whatever you do is a risk. And doing nothing is also a risk. Hello? In life, if you do something, it's also a risk. If you do nothing, it's also a risk. So you have to take risks. Everyone needs to take risks. So what kind of risks can we take? And what is the process we need to follow? As an organization, there are some theories. But many of these theories can be applied to your general life. That's why marketing is a transformational discipline. You can apply all these theories that we are talking about to yourself, right? Before you apply to a product, a brand, a company, apply some of these theories to yourself because you're also a product. You're also a brand. Don't forget that. I always look at it that way. How can I apply this theory to myself? Right. So what is a risk? As per the definition, it is something that can have an impact, and the nature of damage tends to be the organization, and its strategies, resources, and plans will be impacted or damaged. Right? So it is something that can impact something good. Right? It is a bad thing which will come about and impact something good in the organization. Maybe your resources, maybe your plans, maybe your strategies. You're doing well, all of a sudden something comes and impacts. Right? You never predicted it. You never forecasted it. You never planned for it. That is why it is a risk. That is why it's a risk. sometimes we can't anticipate all risks. We cannot anticipate all risks. Look at what we are going through as a country right now, leaving the politics aside. Whoever knew we would come through this risk in 2022? Whoever knew we will have this kind of problems? Right? We never thought so, right? And now COVID is also almost gone. But we still can't fathom because none of us anticipated this perhaps 5 years ago. Will we ever come to this situation? And that is exactly what risks are about. It is something that you don't anticipate. It is something that is wild, something that is out there that you laugh and say, it can't happen to us. It will happen to everyone else, but it won't happen to me. It's really funny, right? We always think that way, no? It can happen to everyone, but to me, it won't happen. I used to always think about like that when it comes to my cholesterol levels. You know, in my 20s, I used to always think, it will happen. My father might get, I won't get it. Right? Why? Because I used to run 10 kilometers a day. So you're not bothered. No, I'm fit. But then the older you get, the moment you jump 35 only, you go and take a test and realize, my God, this is hereditary. It can run in the family. No matter how fit you are, you can get it. So my point is, what you think you will not get are the kinds of risks that come about unplanned and surprise you. And sometimes it can be devastating. So you have to think about even an outside chance of something that will happen. If it does happen, are you ready? Are you ready? It won't happen, but if it does happen, are you ready? Are you ready? Right? So hazards are typically things that are in a manufacturing environment. They do harm in terms of, it can be physical harm, right? Now, in a manufacturing environment, in a construction setup, you'll have a lot of hazards, right? Physical damage, potential physical damage. So it can be machinery related, it can be equipment related, it can be pollution, it can be weather, right? So hazards are that. And our job is to eliminate hazards. Eliminate hazards. You are a natural at that the day you have a baby in your house. The day you have a baby in your house and who starts walking around, all this time crawling, so can't move about, now started walking around. So now you're starting to think, my God, what if the baby goes and knocks on the table? What if the baby goes and bites the dog and the dog will attack the baby? So you're thinking, my God, what if the door is open and baby goes out and falls into the pool? So you're naturally thinking about all the hazards, right? So what do? You go and put sellotape, you go and cover all the hazards. I have also gone through that. In fact, my mind works in such a way that if I see any risk, I'm a little paranoid, especially until children become an age where they can speak, because then they can say, right? So in an organization too, in a manufacturing environment, you must eliminate all hazards. And you need to have an eye for that. You need to say, I think there's a huge probability that this will happen. And that comes through experience. Right? And after you eliminate all the hazards, you can't eliminate 100% of the hazards, but at least the big ones you should eliminate in a manufacturing environment. Okay? Because there's compensation involved, there's insurance involved, there is reputation involved. There's a lot of problems if you just let it go. And what is risk management? It is defined as the probability of an event and its consequences. So risk is defined as a probability of something that will happen. This may happen in the future. If so, what is the consequence? What is the impact? And risk management is a practice of using processes, methods, and tools which we are going to learn today for managing these risks. Therefore, you need to learn these tools to minimize the impact of risk. You cannot eliminate risks. Only way to do it is the day we are buried in more or less cemetery. The day you stop living life, that means that's also the day that you stop taking risks. If you're living life, that's a risk. It's a good thing. Risk taking is a good thing. I'll show you this chart for you to understand it. Now, this is a chart that talks about risk appetite. What do you mean by that? Risk appetite versus risk tolerance. So you can see in the green bar here, right? It denotes that a certain amount of risk must be taken in business. A certain amount of risk must be taken in business. So you need to define that parameter. Now, I used to be a lender, a retail banker. I used to lend. When I say lend, I used to approve and underwrite credit card limits, housing loans, personal loans, and so on and so forth. And sometimes you look at the file and you look at variables we are trained to look at, and then you use a judgment and say, let's give this loan to this guy. He will pay. Right? Of course, you put certain conditions. Get the salary in, get a guarantee in, whatever, you will have the conditions. So if they want to, they'll take it. Sometimes you price the risk and say, right, normal price is this, add another 2% more surcharge and go to this guy. That will negate any ill effects that the person has, but still let's do this business. So there is a risk appetite that everyone has and every business should have. Then you come to a point of defined tolerance. And then you come into what we call unacceptable risk. Now, the moment you go into risk tolerance, you then need to start shifting gear and moving back. But if you don't go up to the maximum point of the green, you're not making money. You're not doing business. If you're only occupying risk appetite of 3 bars and not going through all 7 bars, the challenge is to go to the 7th bar there and make sure you don't go to the red. That means you're taking risk to the max, but you're not taking risks that will impact the business. So this may depend, right? Your risk appetite will depend from business to business, product to product, and also sometimes the environment, what the environment is going through. So at a customer level, also you need to understand what are the risks. So this is an important diagram because it shows you that if you don't take risk, you're not doing business. But define the parameters of risk appetite, risk tolerance, and unacceptable risk. And this sort of diagram sums it up beautifully, right? This diagram sums it up beautifully. What does it say? It talks about risk reward. And I used to have arguments all the time in the boardroom when I used to be a banker, okay? Because I'm a business guy. At the same time, I used to be an underwriter. So you have to be positive and conservative at the same time. So it's a little difficult, right? If you're a business guy, you're always pushing for business. But then when you become an underwriter, you're saying, be careful, be careful. So I used to wear both hats at some point, and it's a little difficult. It's a little difficult, right? So what does it mean? It means you need to give, but be careful at the same time. It means you need to do business and be careful at the same time, right? So sometimes when you go to the boardroom, board members will say business is down. Why haven't we met budget? Then you are compelled to sometimes come and sit in your seat and take more risk. Take more risk. But you have to be careful, because it might also, if you take the wrong kind of risk, it might go bad, right? So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. That's where managing risk is a specialized skill. And if you look at this, one of the key questions that managers grapple with is, what is a risk reward? What is a risk reward? So usually when you start up a business, if you can see the level of risk versus the level of reward. So when you start, perhaps your level of risk, right, is fairly high and your reward is fairly low, startup, right? And over time, even as you grow your business, your level of risk remains high and your reward also is high. That's a good place to be in, right? Risk is high, reward is also high. Then even as you reach some level of maturity in your industry, in your business, right, your reward is still high, but your level of risk reduces because you've gone through the learning curve effect, economies of scale. And over time, your risk and your reward become both low. And that's when you start declining, right? So it's a nice cyclical effect of risk reward. Question is, where do you want to be? Level of risk high, level of reward also high. And if your level of reward is greater than the risk that you're taking, you need to take the risk. You need to take the risk, right? So if you don't, then you will either move into any of the other boxes which are less optimized. So strategic risks, this guy Archer in his book spoke about the importance of understanding risks that will impact the strategy of the organization. As strategists, we need to look at what are the risks that will impact the corporate and the business unit strategies of the organization. That is critical. That is critical. That is critical. So you have to ask yourself constantly, how do I scan the macro micro environment? How can I keep my antennas open? What will this budget 2022 in November bring about to our business? Threats, opportunities. Given the dollar crisis right now and the flotation of the dollar, which we don't really know what it's going to be tomorrow. Now I heard today it's almost 290. It's very difficult. We are pricing our business, we are other courses, we are pricing it every day. Every day we are pricing it and repricing it. Dollar goes up, we are pricing it, dollar comes down, we are repricing it. Can't help. You have to now revisit your strategies and review your strategies daily in an extremely volatile environment. So understanding the uncertainties and the macro impact, the micro impact that can have on your strategies, impacting your corporate strategy as well as your business strategy is critical. Is critical. Now, whistleblowing is a term that can be used to understand any malpractice, any issues related to corporate governance, any corruption related issues that are happening, or any policy violations or deviations unauthorized happening in your organization. So now I used to work for a couple of banks. Whistleblowing is a very big, important, we have a whistleblowing policy in the bank, which means Because when you say a bank, sometimes you have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 staff. Depends on the size of the bank. Now, sometimes if you are heading a department, you might have 150, 200 staff. My last job as the head of retail banking, I had about 450 staff. And they're all over the countryside, all over the countryside. So now, sometimes as the head of retail, if a customer gives me a bribe to approve a loan, and I have the authority to do it, I have the authority up to 50 million, give a housing loan. Now, if a customer comes and says, can you approve my housing loan, Louis? I will give you 1 million rupees. I went to so many other banks. They said, no, but can you do this? Meet me at Barista. I'll give you 1 million cash. Approve my loan. Now, let's say I go and take that decision and I justify that decision. Down the line, after I make my decision, it goes to 3-4 people who will suspect, hey, Louis has done something wrong here. And he's overly justifying this file. He's overly justifying this customer. He's gone beyond his parameters. He can be my boss, but I need to whistleblow. I need to go and tell the head of risk or the CEO or the compliance department in the bank or the head of audit. I have to go and have a chat. I'm just an executive, but I have to go and tell something fishy is happening. Please protect my name. Don't disclose my name. It's a confidential thing. But one of my senior bosses, I suspect something. That is called whistleblowing. That's called whistleblowing. So Edward Snowden was a whistleblower, right? He was a whistleblower against the US government, right? And then we have so many others who are global. WikiLeaks is another one, right? Julian Assange. And there are so many whistleblowers, okay, who come about and say, here's evidence. I think there's something going wrong. So I think it's an important policy to have in a company, because then everyone will be careful to work within a defined parameter of risk, a policy for risk. Don't go outside that. And therefore, you know, there are a lot of people watching you. In fact, to be very honest with you, you know, in banking, they take risk to a different level actually. Because banking involves money, right? Your depositors' money and the lenders that you're lending to. So they take risk to another completely different level. I need to tell you all that. Non-bankers, so because you don't know, bankers take risk to a completely different level. So we look at so many kinds of, we will call it Basel III standards. They are global standards, right? PCI, DSS, which is IT related, data security, cyber security and data protection, and how you encrypt and decrypt. So we look at crazy things and make a lot of investments to manage risk within a bank. But still, with all those protocols, there are a lot of people who make a lot of policy violations, fraud, theft, and also sometimes not so deliberate, but mistakes also. Very senior people, right? We've also seen a lot of large-scale fraud happening, right? That is because you don't have a strong whistleblowing policy. Because somewhere down the line, someone sees something going wrong, they need to go ahead, but they need to have a confidence that their name won't be exposed if they blow a whistle and say something is wrong. So this is a very good practice to institutionalize, right? To keep everyone in check and balance. So Arca spoke about 3 types of risks in high growth markets: competitive risk, overcrowding. Sometimes you might see changes in the marketing changes in technology, market stagnation, price wars, and then you'll have certain limitations, limiting factors. Limiting factors, we call them as constraints, resource constraints. And sometimes limiting factors, you need to always ask, what are my constraints in this business? What are the things that inhibit me, limit me, stifle me in growing? Which means your strategy is getting impacted. So most often, inhibitions or limitations or constraints come about because of resources, can be human resources, can be financial resources, can be physical resources, can be capital, right? Or competencies, skills, know-how, knowledge, constraint, right? So these are all important risks that we need to identify. Then this is from a textbook, which is fairly useful, which talks about some of the fundamental benefits of risk management. Now, I'm not going to go through all these points because they are fairly straightforward. But there are financial benefits, obviously, right? Your losses will be curtailed. You can make more profits in terms of growth, productive growth, safe investments. You then have infrastructure related benefits, right? You have reputational benefits. There are some companies who take very good risks. They quantify risks and they analyze risks, and their investments are properly diverted, right? So you have you earn a reputation. You satisfy regulators, right? Good publicity, enhanced shareholder value, which means your share price will increase, your brand equity will increase. And there are some benefits in the marketplace in terms of taking good risks, starting from your market share. You will attract the right kind of suppliers and distributors. So there are other commercial benefits as well in managing enterprise risk management, right? All right. Okay. If you do have any questions, please pop it in the chat so that everyone can see it, and I'll be glad to look at them at some point. So far, how are we? Are we good with risk management? Right? All right. Now, this is something critical, which talks about the stages of risk management. So broadly, there are 4 stages. First stage is to identify risk. Let's say tomorrow by mistake, you have been appointed head of risk for a large company. Okay, big mistake. But let's say someone has given you the job. What are you going to sit and do Monday morning? First step is to understand and devise a method to identify risks and hazards. What are the sources? You'll have internal and external sources. And what are the approaches to identify risks? Now, let's say you spent the entire month and you have come up with an exhaustive list of risks. Now you need to, if you like, categorize, analyze, assess, and evaluate risks. So you have a long list of risks. Let's say you are the risk manager of John Keel. So you are the risk manager of MAs or Brandix or something like that. Now you have walked everywhere. You've spoken to all the departments, went to the factory. You've gone into various places, touch points, and you assimilated all the risks. Now you have files and files and files and files of types of risks and probabilities of occurrence. Now you have to somehow find a way to analyze and categorize these risks. So we are going to learn some tools around that. Then the third step is, how do you take each risk that you have categorized based on impact, based on probability, severity, and then start with the most severe risk that can happen highest impact, and then start devising risk mitigation strategies. How do you mitigate risks? How do you mitigate risks? Right? So there are risk mitigation strategies available, which we are going to discuss. Now, this might take a long time for you to do. You can't do this overnight in a large company. And finally, you need to ensure that there is a risk framework, a risk policy, risk reporting framework at a corporate business unit level and a functional operational level, all the way to a tactical frontline level. Everyone should be aware of the risk policies and what their role should be in identifying, analyzing, and reporting risks that they see in the organization. And if you effectively do that, you then will be classified as a culture that is mindful of risk in the organization. If you do have a CEO who's risk averse, who does not like to take risk. In fact, I have worked for some CEOs like that. I have worked for some CEOs who actually don't like to take risk, don't like to take decisions. In fact, will prolong it so much that someone else takes the decision. I mean, they don't last too long. They don't last too long, right? Because especially with business guys, they don't last too long because there's a lot of pressure. But I've worked with CEOs who are extremely risk averse, hate taking risks. How can you run a business? And it creates a frustrated culture. So the question is, you need to address the risk, understand, classify, have a dialogue, see, is it within a policy, look at the appetite, and then have a consensus whether the risk should be taken or not taken. Otherwise, you can't do business. Okay. So these 4 areas, I have actually put them in a risk management cycle like this in my book. If you look at my book, I have a chapter on risk management, chapter number 18, figure 18.15. Please have a look at my book, where I have also given my thoughts on risk management, right? So what are the types of risk? Okay, so these are fairly straightforward stuff, so I'll go through them fairly quickly. You can have physical risks. Examples are there. Economic risks, I think we are seeing them live today in Sri Lanka. Financial risks, capital adequacy, cash flow problems, debtors not paying you, so on and so forth. Business risk, right? Something that will impact your business strategies. Political and country risk, right? Political risks. If you have a hung parliament, if you have, volatility, political instability, that's a huge problem. This is why we are not getting investors today to Sri Lanka. Because although government has 2/3 majority, looks like they can be toppled very soon. So if there's a regime change, the philosophy changes. I mean, if you look at the last 3 governments, they lost whilst having 2/3 majority. Now see what is happening in Pakistan. Pakistan was a hung parliament. When you say a hung parliament, what it means is coalitions form governments. And as a result, now Imran Khan was a good leader. We all thought so. But this month, there is a no confidence motion that he might lose and he might stop being the prime minister, right? After a few years in power. In fact, in Pakistan, not a single prime minister in the history of Pakistan has finished an entire term. So we are better. We are a little good. They have always been overthrown without finishing one term. Never in the history of Pakistan has a prime minister finished one term without being overthrown. Can you imagine the uncertainty? Can you imagine the volatility? Will you ever go and invest in Pakistan? Now think about Sri Lanka. Will people come and invest here? At least they don't have 2/3, but here we have 2/3 and we still end up losing. And then the regime changes, the philosophy changes. People stop what other guys did and start new things. So country risk, political risk, economic risk, exchange risk. I don't need to tell you that at the moment. You're a victim of that. If you held back to pay your GBP for your assessments and your membership, God bless you, you lost about 28%, right? We are all losing, not only you. I have lost about, so many millions now with that. And forget about me, imagine big companies. I know of companies that have lost billions overnight because of this, right? On settling their TTs and LCs, they've lost billions, right? So sometimes you can see the devastating effects, and you think those companies are going to keep quiet. They're going to pass it down to the customer. They're going to pass it down to the customer. And if it gets passed down to the customer, obviously inflation rises. And these are huge problems, right? So information risk is a big problem today. Cybersecurity is increasingly becoming a very big risk. Now, as marketers, you might not be exposed to cybersecurity, especially in Sri Lanka, we're a very small market. But cybersecurity is a big, hot topic. It's a big industry in terms of protecting information and preemptively trying to sort of preempt. Involves a little bit of IT as well, information risk, as well as cyber risk. Big problem, right? Reputational risks. All these things at the end of the day will boil down to impacting your reputation. Sometimes, guys, with the advent of social media and the digital landscape growing today, I think you're doing a subject on this, on reputation. Sometimes all the reputation you build over the years can be lost with one viral video, and your brand value will start to erode. We all saw how Ronaldo moved that Coca-Cola bottle and put a water bottle, and how Coca-Cola stock started to come down. We sometimes see if Elon Musk tweets something, if he tweets about a company and he's bought a solar panel or something for his house, you see the stock price of that solar company just going through the roof. Same thing happens downwards also. If he says this game is a bad game for children, immediately that game usage starts to drop. One tweet. So my point is, reputation management today has got tougher because of all the viral content. Sometimes you are not really even done. It's not you, but someone takes a fake video and starts circulating with your company's image. This happened to a restaurant I know in Sri Lanka, right? Right? The front image was taken, and then the other footage was some other restaurant. And that went viral in Colombo so much that restaurant had to close down. The restaurant had to close down. And you did absolutely nothing. Some idiot took that picture and did the video. And when it gets forwarded so many times, so fast, when you wake up in the morning and look at it, you don't know, thousands of millions of people have seen it. Right? So there's very little you can do. This is the problem. Digital evolution has a lot of opportunities and threats, right? So it can damage your reputation. So political legal risks are classified here. We discussed them. Business risks can be operational, can be fraud, can be contractual risk, commodity risks, strategic risks, economic credit bubbles, economic cycles from boom to bust, country ratings, collapse of financial institutions, and there can be so many kinds of economic risks. Financial risks, again, currency is one, interest rate risk is another. We see now the rates going up, the Fed rates being cut in the US. Sri Lanka, we are volatile. We are exposed to what's happening in the West. Even if the West sneezes, we are going to get affected big time, right? Especially now, given our reserves. So gearing risk, the amount of money you have to fund your projects, and raising capital for new projects. So sometimes you might have your debtors not paying you, which will impact your working capital cycle. And you can't order new raw materials. You can't pay your suppliers because your customers have not paid you, and you can't go and pressure them too much. They'll say, we won't do business with you again. But your suppliers are pressuring you. So it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. So you need to manage your working capital cycle. Cyber risks is a technological risk, data protection, and all these digital related technological risks. So as you know, cyber risks has many kinds of sub areas, from phishing, viruses, malware, password attacks, all these are the kinds of technological terminology that we use. But cyber attacks and cyber risks are big problems. Hacking to all these things, right? Password related, malware, viruses, these are big problems for companies, right? Overnight, you'll get impacted with these. It's going to cost you a lot of money in terms of responding. If you do have, today there's ransomware. People come and steal, and they ask you to put cryptocurrency somewhere for you to give your data back to you, or not leak the data to the public. They hold you at ransom. And if you don't pay those, millions of dollars they ask you to pay, they will do it. And there are companies that were not paid and they have done it. And you can't catch those guys because it's some company in Cyprus or some company far away. You don't know who they are. You can't go there and try and pay the police to try and catch them. It's very difficult. So you end up paying it. And that's why prevention is the best way with cybersecurity. You have to invest a lot of money, especially in technical resources, both in hardware and software, and people who can prevent it through firewalls, other various kinds of technical measures they can take, password protection. That's why in our companies, when we work, they say, don't share your password. They say you have to log out of your screen if you are getting up from your chair. You have to log out immediately. You have to have firewall protection. Good old days, they didn't allow us to log into our account, our internet account from our Blackberries or from home, but now you have to allow it. So you can imagine with all that, there is a lot of cyber-related security issues that will come about. And it continues to be a very big area and a big problem. Environmental risks. Again, here, the physical risks you sometimes cannot avoid. I mean, in Sri Lanka, we have huge droughts, which we are going to experience in the month of April, right? On top of all this, imagine, on top of all the issues that we're having right now, when we start having the April drought, is going to be a disaster. And then we have the monsoon rains that come about, 2 seasons of rains that come and play havoc, right? Floods, right? So you see, we have our fair share of environmental risks, natural disasters. Of course, we don't have the tsunamis and the tornadoes as frequent as we have in other countries like Indonesia and in the States, but we have our fair share of environmental hazards. And manufacturing can be impacted, supply chains can be impacted. So you need to really be, you know that this is going to come about. Actually, even the seasons you can predict. You know it's going to happen. So you need to plan for it. You need to plan for it, especially if you're a manufacturing organization. Service organization, not so much impacted. But one of the things that you need to have to prevent environmental disaster, especially in a manufacturing operation, or even a service organization is to have a, what we call a disaster recovery site. A disaster recovery site. That means if you are in a particular building, overnight if something happens, you must have another disaster recovery mock site set up somewhere with laptops and firewalls and all the hardware and the software, so that someone can move in there and the operation continues. Especially if you're a bank, the operation can't stop. Right? Let's say your credit cards are down, your system is down. This happened to us once. We were using a system in India. We were outsourcing a system from Chennai, right? And we had about 100,000 credit card customers. And I'll tell you, Chennai went under floods. Chennai was just flooded, and our systems were impacted. And it was a huge problem. Sri Lanka is not raining perfect weather. Chennai is terrible. So now 100,000 customers are going to fuel sheds, pumping petrol, giving the card. Card is not going through. And they're calling our call center. They are blasting our staff. Imagine 100,000 customers. You go and shop at a Keels or a Cargill's and you come 35,000 basket, keep it there and you pull out your card to pay. Not going through. Now what do you do? What do you do? So the only thing is you call someone in the bank and blast the hell out of them and say, what's going on? I'm trying to pay for this. I have to take this stuff. I've spent 1 hour shopping, so you have to sit and answer all those calls. So finally we had to fly into Chennai in the next flight. We had to fly in there and we had to go there. And when we went there, we also had to get into the water, somehow convince those guys to get there. Actually, they had a disaster recovery site also in Chennai. So this is a problem, right? This is a huge problem. Their disaster recovery site was also a few buildings away in Chennai. So can you imagine? I mean, it's something that we also missed. When we evaluated them as a vendor, we should have made sure their DR site is somewhere else, not in the same place. So it was a fault that we also, so we had to fly in there, put a lot of pressure. 3 days. The system was down. Imagine 100,000 customers can't. So we had to SMS all the customers and say, sorry, we're having a big problem. Don't swipe the card. Don't shop with our card. Reputational damage, imagine. Business damage. And we ended up having to sue that Indian company. We had to sue the Indian company. And some level of damages were taken by them. But to them also, what they are saying is natural disaster. Right? These are disasters that we didn't predict this. Floods and things like that. Who can predict? Only God. So as per our contract, natural disasters, so they had to, we stopped paying them after some point, but big problem. So you can see these are huge issues. So you need to foresee all these issues. Scenario plan. Attempt to predict the future. What will happen? What if this happens? But what if this happens? No, both those won't happen, but what if this happens? That's like, the cricket team saying, what if Kusal Mendis plays today? No, Kusal Mendis won't play today. But what if Dimut Karunaratne scores a century? No, he's not even in the one-day squad. What if this guy takes a hat-trick? So you're thinking about all the what ifs. Sometimes all of them what ifs don't work. Some other what if works. No? So that is the problem with risk. So it's very difficult to predict the future, but with experience, you get better at it. You can never eliminate it. Reputational risk. Right? Big problem can destroy a good company and erode shareholder value overnight. Again, if you're a company operating in international markets and you're going to get a case study, which is a multinational company, your case study will be on a global organization. So you need to be aware of the kind of risks that you'll have exposure to internationally. Sometimes you might have a cultural risk, right? a cultural risk. If there is litigation, right, then we had to pay for that, whatever that ship that came with the pourer, right? We had to pay for it in dollars. We paid a massive amount because they went to Singapore and they sued us. They went to Singapore and sued us. So before we got sued, which will include the legal cost also, we agreed saying, okay, 75% or whatever percent, we'll pay that, right? We don't want it, right? But we'll have to pay it because it is China, right? So you can see all these are issues. Credit related items in transit can have a problem, right? I think last year there was a ship stuck in between the canal, right? I can't remember which canal it was, right? There was a ship stuck. Can you remember that ship was stuck inside the canal and thousands of other ships could not pass through I think the Panama Canal. Thousands of ships couldn't pass through. And as a result, entire global supply chain was impacted for about 2-3 weeks because the ship could not move. It had got stuck, right? So these are completely things that are out of your control. Who can ever predict something like that will happen? But you have to think of all the outside chances, and whatever you think that won't happen, end up happening, right? So that is the best way. Now, what do you mean by residual risk? So we talk about inherent risk versus residual risks. So you see, sometimes we plan and plan and plan, right? And we talk about eliminating risks. But after all the controls, as you can see this diagram here, there are inherent risks. We put them, we subject them through controls, right? But still there is an amount of risk that is remaining. Therefore, as per the definition, residual risk is the risk remaining after efforts have been made to reduce the inherent risk. Even by reducing the inherent risk, still there is a component of residual or remaining risks available, right? Now, one of the things that you can do in an organization that you want to bring about a good risk management culture, right? A risk management mindset and a risk management culture in the organization. If you want to achieve that, one of the things you can do is to give each department a risk register. If you give each department a risk register and tell each department head, you are responsible to report any risks and mark these risks, rate the consequence and likelihood, high, medium, low, or 1 to 10, adequacy of controls, and you can prioritize the risk. Sign off and share it every Monday morning with the head of risk of the company. So it is like a register that you get bottom up, where you start registering any new risks that you see. Because the problem with risk is it is evolving. It is not static. Every week, every day, every month, every quarter, you will be exposed to new risks. And then you need to capture them somewhere. So I remember we used to have an award, an annual award, where if there was certain risks that come about during the year, which have been captured by department heads proactively, at the end of the year, the CEO will give the manager of that department award saying, well done. That means that guy has the foresight, the strategic foresight to reasonably predict that these risks will come about during the year and impact the business. So you give them an award, a medal, a certificate, and say, well done. You have done a good job in anticipating and predicting the risks. So risk register is an important exercise. And then you can have internal sources of risks. Remember, risk is something that is not only macro and micro, which is external. You can also have risks from within the organization, right? For management incompetence, lack of leadership. You can have systems related, process related, technological risks, financial risks, right? And also customer related complaints and so on and so forth. So internal sources of risk can also be probable, and sometimes you need to do the same thing you do with external risks and try and predict the internal risks. So how do you do this? What are the approaches to identifying risks? This is some theory. So 4 broad methods to identify risk. How do you identify risk? The first method is ask yourself the question, are there any risks that will impact my objectives or goals? I have budgets, I have annual objectives, I have annual goals. That's called objective-based risk identification. What are the risks that will hamper you from achieving your annual objectives? And then you say, here are the risks. A second way is resource-based risk identification. What are the types of resources you lack? And that can be a source of identifying risk. Functional audit-based risk identification. This is that annual audit. Remember, the finance guys come and sit in your department, take all the receipt books out, take all the invoices out. They drink plenty with you, eat lunch with you, all that, and they write a report at the end of it saying, these fellows are not doing this. They're nasty, That's their job. That's their job. Those finance auditors that come and sit with you every year, nasty fellows. And then they come and eat and drink with you, and then they have put 150 audit comments. Right? They put 150 audit comments. You feel like poisoning them next time when they come, right? They put a lot of audit comments, and now you have to sit and write long responses to all these audit comments. I'm sure you have exposed this, right? You have exposure to this. So that is also a good exercise for the organization, because you'd rather have your auditors capture through a functional audit than the risk actually happening and no one identifying them, right? Scenario planning is another good way of identifying risk. So what is scenario planning? We did this. Scenario planning is to look at the base case, business case, best case, and the worst case. Or the base case, business case, 10% plus optimistic case, 10% minus pessimistic case. And then you understand the various scenarios surrounding that. So we did scenario planning in the first chapter, right? All right. Any questions? Anything you want to clarify? I have been going on and on. Anything you want to clarify? Can you please give me a thumbs up if you understand? If you don't understand, you can put another sign. Can you give me some feedback? Do you understand? Am I going too fast, or is it just what I say makes sense? Or can you give me some feedback? Hey, we don't understand what you're saying. Can you type something? Yes, no. Am I? Yeah, all good.
Can elaborate the difference between objective-based and resource-based difference?
Yeah. So what it's trying to say is objective is anything that will impact your objectives. Now, in your marketing plan, your objectives, I want to achieve so much of quantity, so much of market share. Those are your two objectives. Now, what prevents me from achieving that? Right? Those are objectives. Resource-based means resource-based identification is, again, lack of resources. What are the resources that you need? So not specific to the objectives, right? But any resources, is there a constraint of resources for you to day-to-day run your business? Can be to achieve plans also, but in general, do you have a lack of resources? So what are the resources? Financial resources, physical resources, human resources, right? Can be intangible resources. So are there any resource limitations? Again, that will impact your overall plans, or maybe a process, or even your objective. So there can be overlaps between these areas. And don't worry about that, right? Because in business, everything does not work in a straight line, especially with theory. There can be overlaps in between all these areas. Doesn't matter. Okay, clear? Any questions? Any other questions? Yeah, objectives are smart objectives or goals, right? Project management. No, so in marketing, to answer your question, Suresh, we look at risk as the upside of risk, the risk reward. So sometimes, I mean, not only marketing, general business, you need to look at the risk and the reward, right? When it comes to risk, actually it cuts across marketing to project management to finance. Risk is risk. Risk is business. So you can't say marketing risks separately, IT risks separately. All the risks are business risks. So even in project management, risks are the same risks that you have in marketing. So all are coming under business risk. But if you look at the marketing department, it might have specific risks that the marketing guy can influence and control, like brand related, customer service related, so on and so forth. Okay, but overall, that's why I started by saying risk management is a day-to-day thing. Even you and I are risk managers. Even you and I, but we don't sit and put risks in an Excel sheet and prepare a spider diagram and a risk radar, and we don't do that. But in certain industries, imagine the kind of risk-related analysis NASA must be doing, right? Scientists. Imagine the risks that they looked at, the kind of stuff they looked at, samples, so many kinds of scientific evidence they looked at when they were coming up with vaccines, right? Banking takes risk into, my God, you actually get tired at the end of the day after a risk meeting, because there's such a lot of regulation and data analysis on risk. Right, so much of number crunching on Excel, from probability analysis, sensitivity analysis, WASIS analysis. So in banking, you have to predict today a customer going bad in the next 1 year. I have to try and predict now. How do I predict that? I have to look at variables based on his repayment, based on where he is working, based on every single customer. And that's why we call what we call forecasting. I'm not going to use banking terminology on you, but you have to try and every single customer you have to categorize and move him around, see whether he will get delinquent in the future. We call them non-performing loans. So how do you do that? Every single customer. It's really tough, but you're supposed to do it. Okay. There are different global standards that govern banking industry today, and it's getting really tough. IFRS, right, is a new standard. Basel III is another standard, and banks need to implement them. Banks need to implement them. And sometimes you don't have the kind of expertise also in Sri Lanka, the kind of knowledge. So you have to import it from either India or the West because there's such a lot of technical jargon in all there, right? Because banks and all have to report their find the listed companies. So investors look at these things. So risk management in the banking industry takes it to the next level. Okay. Nice, but sometimes little too much. Okay. Okay. So we call this the probability impact matrix. Now, there are so many authors who have done this matrix. So this talks about 4 risk mitigation strategies, right? So if the probability of something happening is low, of a risk happening is low, but the severity of the impact or the severity of the risk is also low, right? Then you can accept that risk. But the probability is high, the severity is high, abandon that risk. Abandon that risk, right? Probability is high, severity is low, reduce that risk. There are certain things you can do to reduce, like outsourcing. Probability is low, severity is high, transfer that risk. So there are so many authors who have come up with various versions of this model. It doesn't matter. I will give you some examples. First one is, how do you avoid the risk? Don't undertake the strategy. Example, if you think I need to grow my business by going into China in a certain industry, but the Chinese market is sometimes closed. They won't let you repatriate your profits. All right, then don't go there. Go into another market that lets you repatriate your profits, right? So by not undertaking the strategy, of course, you lose amount of business, but you also lose the upside, which is the reward, and then you don't undertake that risk as well. That's why risk reward is very, very important. Reducing the risk. So reducing the risk is coming up with steps, precautions, like health and safety requirements in a manufacturing environment. What can you proactively do to reduce the risk? Accept the risk. You say, okay, let's live with this risk, but let's get an insurance company to insure the risk. That's why we get travel insurance. We get travel insurance, right? Because our baggage can be lost. We can go overseas and get COVID, you need to quarantine. So you get a travel insurance. Why? You want to go on the holiday, but if it happens, then you'll be paid by the insurance company. Transferring the risk. You can outsource it. Now, some companies may have labor unionization. So if you have a problem with your labor that unionize, especially in a manufacturing environment, if they all protest saying, give us 5,000 increase, now dollar has gone up, we can't live with the salaries. Give us 5,000 increase, otherwise you won't come to work for 1 month. And they come to work, but they stay outside the factory. They don't go in. Unions are a very big problem, especially in countries like ours. Can be politicized as well. So what do companies do? They transfer their risk. Sometimes they can hire a company and say, transfer and get all these guys under your payroll. So when you hire new people, you hire all new people Under another company, outsourced company's payroll. So then if you want to fire them, they are not an employee of your organization, but you pay a salary to the payroll company who pays their salary. So they can't then they can't unionize. So you have some level of permanent staff, and majority of the staff you outsource. When you outsource, then you can fire them anytime. All you need to do is just write an email to the outsourcing company saying, thank you very much, for this month onwards, we don't need this person's service. So you go contract based, right? But today there is law also, you can't outsource 100% of your staff. You can't do that. So but companies figure out a way to outsource, through outsourcing, how to transfer the risk to other parties. Maybe even suppliers, right? Risk mitigation strategies. How do you mitigate risk? You can brainstorm scenario plan, which we call contingency planning, or what ifs. Contingency plans or what ifs. You can keep a record. That's very important. Having 4 or 5 years of records of all the risk registers. You have to measure your risk, quantify and monitor the risk. And like I told you before, audit and inspect. Spot audits, right, are very, very important. Now, this is something that I want to spend some time on. This is actually called a risk management framework. So this is actually from a bank in Sri Lanka, HNB's risk management framework, maybe not the current one, but I got this from one of their old annual reports. They actually talk about, so this is their risk management framework. Usually if you take a large company, Haley's, Hemas, John Keel's, Ceylon Tobacco, Unilever, all the banks, in the annual report, there is one area called risk. How do you, what is your risk management framework? And there are investors who look at this. Before they invest in the company, they will see whether there is a proper risk management framework, because you are buying shares, sometimes investing billions. And I don't want to lose the money. So what is the risk management framework in the organization? So in this example, you can see there is the first line of defense, second line of defense, third line of defense. So if there is a risk, usually the first line of defense should catch it. They are the frontliners, business line, operations. So they need to look at real-time focus. And usually these guys who run the business, so they also miss the risk, right? And usually the finance department becomes the champion of this. Let's say they miss this risk. Then second line of defense is a risk management unit. You have a separate department inside HNB whose full-time job it is to forecast and see risks. And that the responsibility is the Assistant General Manager, Risk and Compliance. He's the head of that. So his job is anything these guys miss, catch it. So the Chief Financial Officer does the annual audit, goes into all the departments. He looks at all the books. He looks at all the receipts. He does all that. But sometimes fraud can happen here, right? Still with all this checking, fraud can happen, or some risk, operational risk, control risk, cyber security. So then this guy's full-time job, second line of defense, is to catch that. So he has to assess the risk, monitor the risk. So his job is to be the head of risk and compliance. Now, if this guy also misses it, again, there's a third line of defense called the internal auditor. There's another department called the internal audit department. That guy has to catch anything that this guy has not catched. And if all three of them miss a risk, there is at a board level a committee set up amongst the board of directors in a bank called the Board Risk and Audit Committee. Their job is to look at a board level, strategic level, any risk that first line, second line, and third line misses. Still, even with all these parameters, there are risks that happen. Even with all these parameters and meetings. So these guys meet once a week, these guys meet once a week, these guys meet once a week, these guys meet once a month. Even with all those meetings, still risk go through cracks. So you can see, but it's important to have this first line of defense, second line of defense, third line of defense, and board level discussion of risk. This is not a board meeting. This is a separate board subcommittee to discuss only risk management, not business, They only discuss risk, right? And I have sat through these meetings. Is very, very long. It takes half a day, and you wear the risk hat and you sit and all you do is sit and discuss all the risks that you identified and probabilities and impact of what macro, micro, and internal risks can impact the business, right? Here's another example of a risk management framework. This is from the Toyota company. So spend some time looking at some annual reports to understand how to structure a risk management framework. It's a nice diagram like this, sometimes can be a little complicated. This diagram talks about how a company in its risk management process, right in bullseye, the center there, should also incorporate a risk architecture, risk strategies, and risk protocols. This terminology might be important for you to discuss and recommend if you do get a question. So what do you mean by risk architecture? Risk architecture defines the roles, responsibilities, and communication, horizontal and vertical communication in the organization with regards to risk reporting. Risk strategy is the risk appetite, risk attitudes, the philosophy, what is the tolerance level defined in the risk management policy. Who can take approvals? What is the delegated authorities? Everyone can't approve everything, right? Usually a manager can approve 50,000 loan, senior manager 500,000 loan, DGM 5 million loan, CEO 50 million loan. Above that, housing loan has to go to the board of directors, monthly meeting, right? So like that, there is a delegated authority that is given for each level. So all defined by a policy in the organization. Then risk protocols are defined as the risk guidelines for the organization and includes the rules and procedures, risk management methodologies, tools and techniques that will be adopted by the organization. So acquaint yourself with this terminology. You're not supposed to study them because you're doing assignment. But if you do get assignment, you know, look at some of these slides and try and employ these terms in your answer. Now, the scope of risk talks about the 3 levels of risk. Risk can be understood, discussed at a strategic level, at a board level. And there can be many types of risk, including mergers and acquisitions, large shifts in consumer behavior, competitive issues, changes in the industry, inflection points, disruptions in the industry that can disrupt your entire supply chain, your business. Those are strategic risks. Then you'll have operational risks at a business unit level, systems issues, processes, people, management, technology, IT, right? All those are business unit level or operational, functional risks. You then have tactical risks. Tactical risks are lower order risks, right? Individual related, department related, task related, team related, workspace, untidy office, ventilation, all those, canteen not proper, right? all those things can also have repercussions, and those are tactical risks, right? And then we talk about controllable risks and uncontrollable risks. There are some risks that risk managers can plan and control and influence. And then you have what we call completely uncontrollable risks like natural disasters, right? Theft and kidnapping and sabotage, all these things are uncontrollable risks. You cannot control them. You can comply and you can do a lot of damage control after it happens. But controllable risks you can preempt, you can proactively predict and try and avoid, right? Now, this is also pretty critical, some level of theory for you to understand what are the standards available for you to monitor and benchmark risks. So risk management standards, there is ISO standard 31,000, okay? Institute of Risk Management, please try and Google them, go into that. That talks about global practices, best practices of risk. Then the COSO ERM, the committee sponsoring organizations of the Treadway Committee, right? Of course, these have been updated subsequently, but you have the COSO ERM framework, right? It is like the UN Sustainability Development Goals, right? That every company uses as a benchmark for sustainability in the organization. Similarly, the COSO ERM framework is a very popular framework. And of course, you have the COCO framework, criteria of control. So these are some of the standards that you can benchmark your companies, especially ISO. We have the SLS also in Sri Lanka, right? Also is a standards framework. But SLS, a lot of products have SLS without standards, no, in Sri Lanka. So what does this do overall? From a strategic perspective, risks, if you don't mitigate them, control them, create a culture that is aware and receptive to risk thinking, you then start to have what we call strategic drift, which we discussed. Your strategy starts to wear out and you drift away strategically. We call that strategic drift, where you move into what we call a period of flux. We discussed this. The blame game starts. And then you move away from what you're doing well, right? I mean, I put this picture to show you what Sri Lankan Airlines used to be many years ago and where it has drifted today, right? I don't mean any disrespect, but I'm trying to tell you that you strategically drifted, right? Strategically drifted. And I'm not trying to blame anyone, but as an organization, any company can drift away strategically. Strategy wear out or strategic wear out happens when you are not your change management program does not meet the environment's changes. And there is a gap that opens up between the environment and the company's change program. We call that gap strategic drift. And there's a nice diagram that we discussed in the 4th chapter, right? So if there is a company that you start seeing strategic drift, right? I mean, if you look at us, technically right now, we have drifted away strategically as a country, strategically drifting away, right? If you use terminologies, leave the politics aside, we are drifting away strategically. We are drifting away from the reality of the changing environment. We are not keeping up to pace. Why is that happening? And how do you overcome that? Theory tells us strategic drift happens when you're not practicing the emergent approach. You are using more of the planned approach. Harine, your vision is very strong. Vision is there, no? Vision is very, very strong. But that is the planned approach. Planned approach is very, very strong. You have a plan, you have a vision, right? You're articulating a beautiful vision, all lovely words, but execution disaster. Execution disaster. You're not on top of your execution. And execution is the emergent approach to strategy. Execution wins the battle today in a volatile, uncertain environment. If the environment is stable, you can then let your vision run. Your vision runs. Environment is stable. But in a unstable, uncertain, volatile, you have to be on top of your execution. And if you remember right, when we discussed the plan versus emergent strategies argued by Henry Mintz talks about how a pattern of behavior emerges through execution, through implementation, strong execution. And a strategy is formed as opposed to formulated. So a company, when you realize you're drifting away strategically, forget about a company, even yourself. I told you, a lot of things in marketing and management you can apply to yourself. If you feel that you are drifting away strategically, you feel it, no? You feel it. Some of us leave the company also. If it's a company, thank you very much. Company is going down, we are leaving, bye. Same thing people are doing right now, no? Sri Lanka is going down. Today also someone, one of my old girlfriends sent me a message. Hey, bye. Thank you very much. Australia, going. Today is the last day. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you for the memories. So I said, okay, goodbye. All the best. You understand? People just jump the ship. They go. And that's a natural tendency. Don't stay in a sinking ship. Go. But what do you do strategically? One of the things that you can do, which theory tells us, be on top of execution. Throw the plan out of the window. Throw the plan out of the window. Throw the vision out of the window. It's misguiding you. Be on top of execution. Execution excellence. Strategy is execution now. And how can you reassess what you're good at? That's what it says here. How does the firm reassess its strategic capabilities, what you're good at, and use them to exploit new opportunities? So I'd like to ask, when you are personally going through a bad patch, rough patch, and you feel you're drifting away strategically, one of the things that you have to take a pen and paper and start thinking is, what are my capabilities? What am I good at? And it's a bit of soul searching. Sometimes you really don't know what you're good at. Hello? You really don't know. You really not answered that question. 50 ml Bacardi, quiet place. Hey, let me go way back in time. Sometimes I do that, Let me go to my childhood. Let me think about some things that I really used to enjoy doing, which I have forgotten now. So what are you doing? You're reassessing your capabilities. You're reassessing your fond memories, what you're good at, what moved you forward, what ticked you. You're reassessing. You're reassessing what you're good at, because what you're not good at cannot be used in difficult times. It is only what you're good at, which are your strategic capabilities, which can be used as a bench, what I call springboard, as a springboard. What we have in diving, a springboard, it can be used as a springboard to jump to the next level. is only what you're good at. If at that point you're saying, no, let me try and learn something, it's too late because you're drifting. Every minute you're drifting. So if someone asks me, Lewie, you're sinking, Sri Lanka is sinking, and if I'm running tourism in this country, I'll fill golf place. I'll make golf place 1 kilometer beach, you know what, fill it up. Let foreigners come and bathe there. Let it be a reason. Fill 5 beaches in Sri Lanka. Well, the will always fill Nigambo, fill it up so that people can come and swim there. Those are things that you, with a reasonable small investment, you can quickly do. Of course, your environmental groups will be up in arms. JVP will be up in arms. But you have to do something. Get I Love Colombo 10 boards, big boards. We don't even have one to take a selfie. And we are running tourism in this country. Actually, it's depressing. Let me not talk about these things, right? It's really depressing. I'll go off track. Let me not talk about those. Right. So my point is, reassess your capabilities. What you're really good at. What are your resources? What are your competence? And then build on those. Which is something we are not doing. So our organizations to get drifted away. If you think of many companies that are running at a loss right now, drifting, even as you are watching, you're drifting. But if you're not on top of your execution, dollar moves up, you will die a little bit. Move up again, die a little bit. You have to look at daily. Now, today I'm doing a competitor review every 2 days. Some of my staff are mad with me. Say, Lewie, what we said 2 days ago, we had nothing new to say. No. Check. I'm doing a competitor review every 2 days. That's that. To me, I want to know if there's something moved in the market. I need to know. One player in the industry have increased the MBA price. I want to know. Because execution is that. Execution is not wait for 1 month and realize one of our competitors have increased the price by 200,000 and you're still charging the lowest price. No, that's not execution. That's what Sri Lanka is also doing at the moment. No? Playing catch up. Be bold. Execution, being top of execution means you're making decisions daily, big decisions. Okay, 80% right decision, 20% wrong, can't help. When you start making decisions, you make wrong decisions. But try and get 80% right. 20% wrong, can't help. Won't kill you. Right? So that is strategy. That's an emergent approach to strategy. Very critical. That's a thinking that the examiner is looking at. Sometimes the examiner might give you a company that is in trouble financially, losing market share, getting disrupted. Nintendo was one such company. Getting hammered from Sony, getting hammered from Microsoft, which is a huge company. Nintendo is suffering. And if you try and tell Nintendo, look, you're doing a good job, examiner will say mediocre answer. Nintendo is really suffering with Sony and Microsoft and a lot of other players. So what do? You're drifting away. Do something fast. First of all, get rid of your CEO who has been there for 30 years and who's in his 70s, who will not understand freaking gaming. Leadership. Change the leadership. Get his son in running the company. So you have to be bold in making decisions like that and justify as to why you're saying. That is what the examiner is looking at. Right? So the probability risk matrix, I told you many authors are talking about it. So you can have classifications, high, medium, low, and strategic implications like this. This is another author's work, same matrix, probability and impact. Here you color code and use it like a heat map. The reds are catastrophic impact, frequent, likelihood, probability, and then the greens are less so. So you can classify all these risks, and then you can calculate, the numbers are there for you to calculate your total scores to see how good or bad are you overall. So when you start doing this every month, you have to reduce the number. As you can see, the severe numbers are in red, then you have the amber, then you have the green. So if you get a lower score, that means you're improving on your risk. But if your score is going up, even as you identify risks and change your risks, then you have a problem. That means you're getting more risky, right? Then you have what we call a risk radar. I have 15 minutes, don't worry, I'll finish on time. So a risk spider diagram and a risk radar. So this is a spider diagram, as you can see. Customers' perception of performance, example in change in technology on a production line. So what it says here is lowest risk in the center and highest risk. The factors are taken here. I'll show you some students' work as well later on. And then you, based on 1 to 10, you mark like a spider diagram, right? So the factors can be taken from the case study. This is called a risk radar. A risk radar, what you see like a radar in the ship, right? So here in a risk radar, again, you take the types of risks, political, micro, macro, internal risks. And then what you do is like a radar. This is the company, a 1 year horizon, time horizon. What are the risks? And the size of that risk. So you're having a huge political, legal risk, massive risk that is going to hit you in the next 6 months. Then within 2 years, you're going to have a social, cultural risk, but not as much as big as this risk. So like that, you can keep plotting different risks in time horizons and the size of the risks. So you can put different size. This is called a risk radar. It's again a very good diagram, but you have to use case material to identify and plot these risks. And constraints are another word that we can use to understand risks, but constraints are limiting factors, inhibitions. So there can be market-related constraints, financial constraints, performance-related constraints, and the list goes on. I'm not going to read one by one, they're fairly straightforward. Product-related constraints, managerial leadership, change management, competency-related constraints, and bureaucracies, particularly structure-related bureaucracies, can be a constraint, limiting factor, inhibition for growth of business. Okay. So I have put here some past paper questions on risk management. As you can see here, 15 marks. Critically evaluate 3 organization constraints, strategic risks. Limit Intercontinental Hotels Group, 15 marks. Then for 25 marks, assess organization constraints of Liverpool Football Club. These are some past case studies. For 15 marks, critically assess risks facing Walt Disney Parks and Resorts. Interesting case studies, right? 15 marks, critically evaluate 3 organization constraints and risks that may limit British Heart Foundation, which is a charity. Again, 2 more, critically evaluate potential risks facing Liverpool Football Club, 25 marks. Critically evaluate the organization constraints that limit Nestlé's ability to innovate, 25 marks. So you can see there can be 25 mark questions, 15 mark questions, sometimes 10 mark questions also available. So we don't know how the examiner will structure it. Next month, 3 weeks from now, we will know. I want to take you through some A-grade students' work that they have used in the audit to analyze the risk, the 6-page audit. So what you do here is you can analyze you can read the case study and analyze the entire risk in a table like this, where you take the categories of risks And under each category, you can take the type of risk mentioned in the case study. Then you have to talk about the impact of that particular risk. So it's a little bit like your macro environment analysis. There can be overlap here. You can rate the risk and you can come up with a strategy on what you are going to do to mitigate the risk, right? Here's another example of a risk matrix by a student. Here's another example of a table that is used. I've just taken some screenshots here, but if you want to look at it clearly, you can look at the PDF in the A grade answers. You can see this as well. Every single A grade answer will have a risk analysis done in the 6-page audit. So don't worry. Usually I help you with this and I'll give you some ideas. Don't worry about it, right? I'll help you out with this, but have a look at some A grades. Here's another example, a screenshot from an A grade. This student has gone a step ahead and done a table to analyze the risk. Again, type of risk, impact of risk, rating, right? High, medium, and or low. So you then have the student who did a risk matrix and highlighted all the risks and a risk radar, as you can see down there. So probably a lot of information about risk management would have been available in the British Airways case study. This is a prize-winning student's work. Again, this is another example. So I'm just showing you a variety. There's no one best way to look at things in marketing. This is another student's work, right? Little blurry because I've taken screenshots. Otherwise, they're perfect if you read them off the A grade answers. This is another student's work. This is another student's work. If you do have any questions, please pop them in. We have a few minutes left. Here's another student who has done a table. So if you have a lot of information, you can do a table to analyze risk, do a risk matrix and a risk radar, right? All are possible depending on the case material that we will have in the case study, 50-page case study. And usually if you have a lot of information, then the chances are high for you to have a question in the assignment. So let's pass it this time. Here's another student's work. Let's pass it this time because for you to study all this and go to the exam hall, next session is going to be a challenge. But personally, I like the fact that it's moving into an exam, personally, right? Personally, I like the fact that it's moving into an exam. Now, Lewie, why are you saying they're really nasty? Well, can I tell you why? Because when we studied CIM, we had 12 subjects to finish CIM. And all 12 were exams. All 12 were exams. Now you have 9 subjects to finish CIM. Now you have 9 subjects to finish CIM and only 1 exam. That's also in first stage. So I think it's a crime to do that by moving everything into assignments. You know, there's a lot of outsourcing going on. Today I had one of the mothers who called me and said, can you give me feedback for my daughter who's submitting the assignment in April, 2 days to go to submit April assessment. Mother is calling me and saying, can you give me the feedback? So I said, well, no, I can't give you full feedback. Your daughter, no, she's going to school. No, she's coming home. So I do this. And so a nice explanation from the mother. So I said, I'm sorry, you can't do the assignment for the student. And I certainly can't support that, right? No, lights are going off, student is not in the frame of mind. So I can't understand what purpose there is. It's a paper qualification you're trying to, it serves no purpose in life. I'm telling you. I get a lot of these requests. Yesterday I had a student who called me and said, here, sir, big favor, I'm going for this company interview, 5 questions, tell me exactly what to say, management training, exactly what to say. I can't understand anything they're saying. I really can't understand any of these questions. Tell me exactly what to say with all your strategy words, tell me everything. So I looked at it and I'm like, what, do I help this student or not help this student? Because if you go there and pass the interview with everything I'm saying, but then every day in the job, she'll call me and ask me what to do now, right? So you see, that is a very short-sighted way of looking at life. Cutting corners, outsourcing, getting someone else to do, you are actually ruining your life. Because you think then you are qualified and all that, but when you get the chance to do the job, you'll be disaster. Therefore, it is rather better for you to be unqualified. So please be genuine about this and do your work, because you are never going to go up in life by not transforming from within. Please understand that. Life is not about piling qualifications. Life is about transforming from within. That's very, very important. Don't cheat yourself. You will suffer one day. Right? So with that thought, that's about it for the 6th chapter. Any questions? Anything to clarify?